Good evening, everyone. This is another edition of CLS Conversations. We have Naomi Datta. Welcome, Naomi. A
Hi
warm welcome
Vivek,
to you.
pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Naomi Datta is a very talented personality with a lot of variety in her career, mainly a TV person, a journalist, a writer, a presenter, and a producer. And a very interesting name as well, Naomi Datta. I believe some people mistake Naomi for Navmi. Is that right? Sometimes?
Very often, but actually it's Naomi. It's a Jewish name. So my dad was leafing through the Bible when I was about to be born, and he really liked the name. So it's a Jewish name. So if you go to Israel, every second person is called Naomi. Like how every second person here is called Sunil or Ramesh. Naomi is the Sunil or Ramesh of Israel.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah,
not
but
a
actually
commonplace.
it's also Naomi. A lot of people also say Naomi, but I prefer Naomi.
Yeah, so Naomi or Naomi is what I'll say. I won't say Navmi at least. And it's not a commonplace name like Vijay, Ajay, or something very common. So it's good to have a name like that. It makes you kind of into the conversation very early, and you don't have to kind of introduce yourself much.
Yeah, we spent some time trying to figure out how to pronounce it, but apart from that, it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really fascinated by your journey, and I've been following you on Twitter a lot. So first, let's get Twitter out of the way. You got these 45,000 or more followers, and I'm sure they're all very
47 now.
enamored by the way you tweet. I mean, you have these wittiest of tweets. How do you manage that every day?
For me, it comes for me like we discussed this earlier as well. For me, my filter is I react to things with humor. Like I'm not a very I'm a bit British in that sense. I don't like sentiment and I don't like sappiness at all. So I can't react to things in a sentimental, emotional way at all. It kind of I get a bit embarrassed with that. So my reaction to everything is through the filter of humor. So I'm constantly looking at things to laugh at. I laugh a lot at myself as well. So it's just a very natural extension of who I am. That's how I am in real life as well. And luckily there are people who seem to enjoy that brand of humor.
Yes, I certainly do. In fact, it's the ability to laugh at oneself is something that I've also learned from others. My wife Nina is able to do it. You say that you are able to laugh at yourself. Perhaps it's the ladies. The men get a little stuck up when people laugh at them.
No, I don't know. There are men who are very self-deprecating as well. But someone said you shouldn't like. I feel like you shouldn't take your work. You should not take yourself too seriously, but you should take your work seriously. So that happens a lot with a humor writer or someone who's funny. That a lot of people then mistake it for imagining that you're not serious about anything at all, which isn't the truth. The truth is that you're not serious. You don't take yourself very seriously, but whatever you do, you take very seriously. For instance, humor writing is also very serious. You can which a lot of, especially in India, I don't know, we are very hung up on this very sentimental kind of writing, and writing which is very self-conscious. So humor writing is still on this, on this level which is a little lower. So yeah, that's where I'm coming
That's
from.
right. In fact, I've also written two humorous novels. You have written a novel called The 6 p.m.
Yes, some
Slot,
of them.
and now you're
Yeah.
on this very. We're going to come to your book, but before that, I want to talk about satire. I mean, the very fact of satire is understood by very few people. I wonder if your thousands of followers on Twitter get everything that you write. I mean, do they understand and appreciate what you're writing?
I would like to think so. I would like to think so, but yes, you're right. That satire is it's tough to do. It's not too many people understand it. Also, you're right about that because I write a lot of columns. I write a lot of humor columns for a lot of publications, and so many times the editors, write in satire, and I'm like, you don't have to say satire. Everyone knows it's satire, and they're like, you'll be very surprised. So yeah, often have to spell it out here. We're not a very evolved market, so to say, for satire. But I'm not. I'm not like underestimating all those lovely people who follow me on Twitter. I'm sure they're getting it. I'm sure they're getting my brand of humor.
Right, let's get straight to your book first. And this is a fascinating book which I've been reading for the last few days. How to be a likable bigot and the survival guide for a savvy survivor. I mean, why are we talking about surviving? Actually, if they read your book, they'll be flourishing, in my view. So, what's it all about?
So how to be a likable bigot is actually, so my first book, the 6 p.m. slot, was a satire, but it was fiction. It was a novel which was based on the world of television. This one, it's taken me 8 years between my two books, and it shouldn't have taken me that amount of time, but well, whatever. So this one was basically a collection of essays. It's 15 essays on different aspects of life. So my whole theory is that there are a lot of self-help books in the market. This is an anti-self-help book. This teaches you how to be just comfortable with who you are. Just stay under the radar. So it is satire. Obviously, I don't expect people to take these tips seriously, but it is satire, and it just tells people. It kind of holds up a mirror, but it's not a rant. It's not anger. There's just a lot of humor again, and somewhere it makes you introspect and it makes you laugh at yourself, because that's very important for me. People should laugh at themselves. They shouldn't take themselves too seriously. So the book is really a collection of essays which looks at the world through the prism of wit, through the prism of satire, through the prism of irreverence. So that's what the book is about. I call it an anti-self-help book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an anti self-help book. I've been reading it, and I'm going to take up 2 or 3 of these chapters with you in conversation here. I mean, these armchair bigots, they can learn a lot. And you talk about the office in one chapter and how the best place to be in a meeting is the one taking the minutes. I thought that taking the minutes and reproducing them was the toughest job. So explain how that happens. And you also use terms like COP instead of EOT. What's that about?
So I have had, though I've worked in television, I've also worked in setups which are very corporate, where a lot of things are done, where you can spend your life being an email chain, and you can waste at least 2 years of your life, not waste, spend it rather productively. You can spend 2 years of your life in just getting everything into this loop of emails. So I wrote a chapter on that. In fact, that was my sample chapter. So when you pitch your book, they want a sample chapter. So that was my sample chapter, how to waste time really productively in office. And that chapter has really resonated. Like, so many people have told me this is our office, which is kind of sad too, but they've said this is exactly our office, where people are just adding this one to the loop, adding that one to the loop, and adding this one to the loop. So it becomes this endless loop, and finally nothing gets done. All you have is 200 emails. And I've also spoken about WhatsApp work groups. So at one point, I was part of 30 WhatsApp work groups. So my whole day could just go in responding to different things on WhatsApp work groups. And you could think you've done work, therefore. So I've just, what I've done is I've just taken what happens in people's lives, what happens in people's work lives, and, just written about it. And it is actually absurd, and it is actually ridiculous what we do in offices. So I think that's really resonated with people in that sense. So you're talking about COB and EOD. So every mail usually is, I'll get back to you end of day, end of day, end of day. So there was this one time, this mail which came to us which said COB, and I said, dude, what is this? They've thrown, this is something new which has been thrown at us. And then I figured out that's close of business, and that sounds even grander than EOD. So it's great. I mean, you can just waste your time in office doing this. Your thoughts in red, your thoughts in green, your thoughts in violet, 1,001 WhatsApp groups, and an endless loop of work emails.
Absolutely. In fact, you also give advice on something like TMI, which is too much information. And you also tell us how we should be in meetings, how we should smile across the room with a slight twitch and things. So a lot of finesse in the book with lots of detail for people to pick up. And the observing eye, the discerning eye will obviously catch some of these and actually use them, hopefully in their various things. But I want to skip along to another chapter. Yeah, go on. First, go on. Yeah. Naomi? I think Naomi's, yeah,
Vivek,
your
your
connection okay?
audio is a little garbled. I can't hear you too well.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Uh, I can't, I couldn't hear your last question. Yeah,
Okay,
I
I
can hear
was
you now.
saying
Yeah,
that this is a lot of
yeah.
advice for
This is
office
better.
goers, and people are going to pick it up very well. But I want to skip along to another chapter about parenting and the kangaroo dad, where we heard of the tiger mom. What is the kangaroo dad concept, and how do you think of it? And tell us about this chapter of your book.
So kangaroo dad is actually a concept which my husband came up with. He's not a kangaroo dad. We don't have children, but this is a concept he came up with because apparently in kangaroos, the female kangaroo does all the work. All the male kangaroo does is sort of, obviously impregnate the female kangaroo, and then he literally hops off. He disappears for like months on end and does God knows what he does, but he just disappears. And then when he comes back, it's okay. Nobody really expects him to do anything, and his children are really happy to see him. So this whole concept of the kangaroo dad is actually just the grand gesture dad. This is the dad who does who's into gimmicks, who's there for the photos, he's a photo opportunity dad. He's there for the Insta post and he's there for the FB post, but for the actual administrative aspect of parenting, which is actually bringing up those kids, he's not there. So this was this concept that we came up with, and we had a lot of fun with it because we've seen a lot of new age dads have this pressure that they have to contribute to the process of parenting. So they're there for the Insta posts and they're there to say the right things, but how much are they actually doing? So yeah, so this is again a very tongue-in-cheek look at parenting and at dads, but obviously not all dads are like that. But I'm just saying it is a satirical book, so we make fun of everything.
Right. So we are giving advice to office goers, to moms and dads, and also to fitness freaks who are overdoing the fitness bit. I mean, people who are posting on Instagram their gym photos and things. You have a lot to say to them as well. And where does that come from?
See, I basically what I do is I observe things. And I spend a lot of time on social media. And I find Instagram very, very amusing because it's literally just people who want to put up photographs. Okay. It's a vanity project. But the thing is, you don't want to come across as this vain person, all the time. Because if you're putting up like 10 photos in a day, you're actually rather vain, and it's fine. But people don't want to come across as vain. So I find it very amusing that they make it about a purpose. So they'll put up a photo of something, of them looking into the sunset, and then there'll be this quote by Rumi, which is about finding being happy within themselves and finding their listening to their soul or something like that. So I find it very, very, very funny. And as far as fitness updates go, it's just that you have I think you should be fit. I'm into it myself. You should be fit, but then you have so you have these two people really. There are people who kind of shame you for being fit. Then there are people who are like constantly being fit. You don't know whether they're being fit for themselves or to put it on. So this is really, it's just observational humor, and I'm just having a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's great that you're having fun while writing it. There's a lot of satire in it, and there's a lot of yarn also. I also read an article by you on Katrina Kaif posting lots of things for a few weeks in the lockdown, and suddenly, these self-righteous kinds of people come and slam the celebs for posting stuff. So I don't think it's a crime to be a celebrity posting things, and I think you agree with me. And let's also bring in the concept of a woke over here. What is this woke, and what is wokefulness, and what's this all about?
So if you spend a lot of time on Twitter and you spend a lot of time on social media, and I think it's this millennial thing rather to be woke. You're looking at everything through the prism of political correctness. And in fact, in the book, I say it also. This is political correctness on steroids. So you can be politically correct, and this is politically correct on steroids. So you can't really make fun of anything. You can't laugh at anything, because if you do that, you might be offending something or someone somewhere. So basically, it's like squeezing the fun out of everything is woke behavior, especially on social media. And then there's certain words that you use when you're woke, and that's entitled, privilege, symptomatic, not asymptomatic, which is really doing well these days, but symptomatic, emblematic, problematic. So everything is problematic. Everything is, you know, So these are the words that you use a lot when you're woke. Basically, like I say in the book, in India we go around telling people, you'll meet someone and they'll say, "Ha, so what are you doing? Enjoying," and you literally don't know what you're enjoying, but you say, "Yeah, enjoying." But
Enjoy.
a woke person much doesn't enjoy anything, because you can't enjoy anything. It goes against everything. Because if you're enjoying something, somewhere you are being privileged or entitled or coming from a position of. So it's just they just take the fun out of everything. So that was, and I have a lot of fun with that, because there's so much of that you see on Twitter or you see it on Facebook, that I just thought, let me have fun with this chapter, and that's what I did. And the chapter is called "How to Crack a Woke Joke," and there is no such thing as a woke joke, because you can't have a joke which is woke.
There are no jokes with wokes. There's something in Hindi called, I wonder if you know, there's something in Hindi called "no joke," which is basically, a little bit of poking fun at each other. But this is great. I mean, the kind of vocabulary you've invented, many of the words in your book, I'll be very happy if you read a page or two. And you have your book with you right now?
Yeah, I think we could do the woke chapter itself.
Yeah, why don't you do the woke chapter? Maybe read the page and give a flavor of your very lucid style of writing and very witty style of writing to readers. This is a book which is unique in many ways, as I've seen, and just the title captivates you and catches your attention.
Okay, I'll just read you 2, 3 paragraphs. So, okay, we'll start with this. The advantages of coming across as woke are many. People assume you're evolved, sensitive, and your conscience is alive and kicking. You might be uptight, a party pooper, a boring overthinker, but your heart is in the right place. You're also fairly harmless, because you won't really do anything. Doers are the problem. Thinkers are also a problem, but mental masturbators never are. So, how do we get you started on being woke? Well, since there's a lot of talking involved, the first thing we need to do is to get your vocabulary. Vocabulary. Vocabulary with the right word.
Yeah.
Entitlement. This is the most important word that you need to bandy. You are intensely aware of your entitlement. It eats away at the core of your entitled being. You are even more aware of the entitlement of others. This is how you can weave this word into everyday discourse. So this is an example that I've given. I'll just read out that example for you, and then
go ahead.
Whatever. So this is an example. I love mangoes. They're my favorite fruit. Friend too. I think they're hugely overrated. Apples any day. Woke you. So this is you being woke. I do hope you guys realize how entitled we are. That we can discuss mangoes and buy them. 70% of the people in this country have never bought a mango or know what it tastes like. So you can make up statistics when you're woke, because nobody's checking. So friend one. So we shouldn't. What is your point? So woke you is unable to speak, as currently your mouth is stuffed with a piece of mango. So friend two says, eat it, but should you feel guilty about eating it? And woke you will say, if you can't acknowledge your entitlement and want to be facetious, there is no point to this discussion. Friend 1 and 2 lose their appetite, and you get to eat their share of mangoes as well. So while you acknowledge your entitlement, it will not come in the way of a wholehearted consumption of the said mangoes. You just have an intense self-awareness of your privilege all the time. It's like traveling in business class, but fretting about how limited leg space could lead to deep vein thrombosis in economy for others. It's about a physical body that travels club class and a conscience that travels cattle class. So
that's very witty. A lot of humor, wit, and satire. And this vocabulary which you mentioned with woke. Indians have a problem pronouncing W and V, as you know. So they mix up their vocab, ver and were anyway. and
Even I
it's
do.
it's hilarious. It's hilarious. I mean, the way you do it. So, but tell me one thing, Naomi. Your Twitter followers, 40 something thousand of them, have they all read your book? Are all your followers also followers of your book? Because I think your book is fascinating and more people should read it. And I'm sure that Chandigarh Literary Society members are going to be fascinated after this conversation. Have they all read it?
No, I mean, I have 47,000 followers on Twitter, and the book hasn't sold 47,000 copies yet. So the thing is, Twitter it's a good way to keep yourself there, and people know what you're doing and they read your columns. But how much of it translates into actual book sales, we don't know. But the book has been widely read because, like I told you, it's been extracted widely. So there were 15 chapters, and out of that, 6 chapters have been picked up by publications, like the Hindu or Scroll or Quartz. So the book has been widely read, and it's there's a lot of awareness about the book, and a lot of people have sampled the book through the extracts. In fact, I had people on Twitter telling me that if half your book is out in extracts, why do you want us to buy the book? You might as well put the whole
Yeah.
book out for us. So,
Mm.
as an author, I feel happy that there is a lot of awareness about the book. A lot of people have read it, whether it's in extracts or buying the book itself. So, I mean, the thing is, right now, this is not an original thought. You can't just be an author. Like, writing a book is one of the things that you do. You have to
Yeah.
look at yourself as a content creator. So the book is just one of the many things you do. That could translate into a podcast. You could do a show. You could do other things around it. I think it's very old-fashioned to assume that because you've written one book, that one book will make you this huge sensation, and that happens only in movies and
Yeah.
and to J.K. Rowling. So that one book will make you a sensation and people will be lining up to buy your book. It just becomes one of the many things you do as a content creator, and that's how I look at myself also. I am a content creator, and then you have to take the book into different avenues. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
Naomi, the thing is that an author has to not only write a book, the second thing is to find a publisher. That's another art altogether. And most writers find it difficult to find publishers. And the third art is to market, promote, and sell your book, which is an entirely different skill altogether. So, as an author myself, I know that these are the three phases of an author's life. And you, because you're on television at times, you're on podcasts. I saw a beautiful interview with Cyrus Brocha and you. I mean, I heard it on podcast. I mean, the kind of wit and humor the two of you displayed, the level is pretty high up there for most people to understand. And Cyrus probably gets away with below the belt things which nobody even hears because it was so rapid fire. So one has to pause and listen again. So tell me, this being a personality in public and then also doing other projects, it definitely helps to promote your book and become a part of your extended part of your personality in a way.
Yes, of course, it does help to promote the book. I mean, I feel my Twitter handle does the most amount of promotion for me. Not just my book, for any work that I do. Because uh, for the longest time, see, when I was on TV, you needed your TV show to keep you alive. So people would watch your TV show, they would see whoever you were interviewing, you would build your base through that. But you disappear. But what would happen then is if you disappear from TV, that's it. Like you're gone. But Twitter, I found, is a way of keeping you alive. In that sense that it doesn't matter what you're doing then, whether you're writing a book, whether you're in a television show, whatever you're doing, it's something that you're doing on a daily basis. You're interacting with people on a daily basis, and they're invested in you irrespective of what you're doing. So I feel social media, Twitter especially, has really helped me in keeping whatever brand there is alive. Which is not dependent on what I'm doing professionally. Because when you're on TV, obviously you're on TV and you do get a lot of people following you, or people who like you because they see you on TV. But that, fortunately, social media has removed that need. That need to be constantly there or have a show or have something that's happening all the time. So yeah.
I think the ability to observe what is happening in human behavior around you, that's a big asset that you have, Naomi. I've noticed that, and any writer worth his salt has to be obviously a very observant person and a good listener as well, and also have a pulse to the change in society which is taking place. So, in your case, I find that you are a great observer of what is happening. Even in the chapter on CVs, there's a chapter on resume writing or CVs which you have, where you mention words like maven and aggregator, which should be mentioned, which nobody does. But if you read a word like maven on a CV, then obviously you're going to take note. So tell us about that so that maybe some youngsters watching can actually learn some tricks and also be tempted to read your book.
So it's just how corporate culture is now, where you can just make up designations. Like everybody can be a VP, because it makes you feel good, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's I just extended that and said, in your CV you can make anything sound a lot grander than what it is. Let me just go to that chapter and tell you instead of yeah, here you go, 17. Uh, I'll just tell you.
Yeah,
Okay.
you have.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So basically one of the terms I said you could use is ideas curator or aggregator. And I've said you've actually never had an original idea in your life, but you're really good at stealing other people's ideas, which means you have the elusive ability to detect a good idea and then pass it off as your own. You were made for senior management. So you can go and describe yourself as an ideas curator. So basically, you're stealing everybody else's ideas, but it's fine. You
Yeah.
can call yourself an ideas curator.
That's
And
what people
thought,
do in the government as well. I've seen lots of them doing that.
so they're idea curators, or a thought leader. A thought leader is very, very misused. Everybody is a thought leader. So you've never held a position of leadership in your workplace, but you do have the ability to guide thoughts and lead them in the right direction. Your own thoughts. Nobody else's, as no one else cares two hoots about you. But you don't need to mention that. For the purposes of your resume, you're a thought leader. Now, you don't have to tell anyone whose thoughts you were leading, but you could call yourself a thought leader. So there are these new age fancy terms that you can pepper your CV with, and they just sound very fancy and they mean nothing. But hey, if they get your job, that's good.
Yeah, why not? In fact,
Yeah.
you've also observed very well the social media personalities. There are the Instagram types and the Twitter types and the Facebook types and everything else types. So why don't you just, as a very savvy user of technology, although I've seen you're not very active on Instagram, what is your advice to people? What are these platforms for? Some older people are also there, and some maybe just greenhorns are there. So where should they do what and how?
I have noticed, I don't know whether you've noticed this, that Facebook has now become for older people. Like I find a lot of, my mom's generation really enjoys Facebook, but you'll see a lot of
Yeah.
younger people, the generation below millennials, Gen Z. I don't even think they'll have a Facebook account at all. But Facebook has become something which has become a slightly older person thing. Twitter used to be, Twitter now has become a slightly weird place. um, I had done a stint in digital marketing for films, and at that point, Twitter was very important for us. Like we had to have a trailer trend on Twitter and all of that, but all of that has changed now. All that action now has moved to Insta. So Twitter has just become this place which is a battlefield of opinions and different cells fighting each other, and that's what's happened with Twitter. So it's rather toxic. So you've got to have a really thick skin if you want to be on Twitter. Insta
Right.
is really where the action is kind of happening, because a lot of your celebrities have moved there. A lot of your travel bloggers or whatever bloggers are there now on Insta. Insta, I've noticed you don't need to be too deep or anything. All they want is pretty pictures. So you put up. That's why
Yeah.
I find it rather boring. But well, it works. It's working a lot now.
Glamour
So yeah,
works.
all pretty pictures, and have a sense of purpose and a sense of nobility about those pretty pictures. So get your Rumi quotes and get your other quotes going, and it'll work for you.
In fact, you mentioned
But
these
there's
Rumi and Gibran quotes as
we
well.
don't know about. But there's so much
Yeah.
else happening. Like TikTok is another world altogether. Like
Yeah.
I just watched videos, but TikTok is another world completely, which we know about fleetingly or vaguely, but that's another parallel universe which is happening there.
Absolutely. It's a very composite kind of personality on social media that people have. They'll post gym pictures and the next day roomy quotes and then, cricket and then something else. So people are pretty multi-dimensional, I've seen. And understanding them takes some, brains. So I wanted to also talk a little bit about your future projects. And you are into now reality TV and content creation. You're a creative director. Would you like to share something about projects coming up?
So I can't talk about upcoming projects because we have these non-disclosure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I work a lot with reality shows, and that's what I do because, as you know, writing doesn't pay the bills. So I do a lot of content creation and script writing for those kind of shows. I want to eventually also do fiction. Fiction, as in I've written a fiction book, but I would like to write fiction as well. It could be anything, a web series, a film, whatever. I haven't, I've done a bit of development in that area, but not enough. But that's something I would really like to do. But I'm sometimes a little worried because I'm so critical. I used to be a movie reviewer myself, and I used to be so critical about other people's scripts that now I'm like, oh God, if I have to write something, it better be very good because I have been so critical about which happens to critics. You stop creating because somewhere you've just become someone who's critiquing all the time. So yeah, that's what I intend to do. That's what I enjoy doing. I like creating stuff. Let's see where it goes. Right now, of course, with this lockdown, there's been this little, blockade which has happened for everyone. But yeah, that's that's what's happening. I also need to write more. I haven't managed to write anything in these 3 months that we've been at home. I thought of writing short stories which are based around the lockdown. Nothing's happened. It's just been one endless loop of domesticity. But yeah.
I know, and a little birdie tells me that you play badminton as well. So how is that going? And lockdown treating you with difficult?
That is the most depressing aspect. There's no badminton. It is very depressing. That's the one thing I would risk going. I'm a very cautious person. That's the only thing which will tempt me to go out.
Yes, I can understand that. And Mumbai is, we're not talking about the virus at all here, but Mumbai is where you have to be extra careful. And there are, but luckily and hopefully things will turn around and we should have more events happening like book launches. I mean, book launches online would be great, but when you have a packed audience in front of you, nothing like that feeling in a book launch is there. I mean, a crowd in a hall and appreciative audience clapping for you. Nothing like that for an author.
I can't imagine, when they're saying they have cricket, and I know you play cricket. I can't imagine cricket matches without spectators. How do you do that? We're talking about that now. How do you do that? Yeah.
Mr. Saidev Krishan Mehta, one of the viewers, has the best question, and I'm going to ask you only one because not much time left. But he's got a great point on. He says, do authors need to be great or good conversationalists as well, instead of just being maybe philosophical and withdrawn and brooding, perhaps, as that I am adding on his behalf. So basically, he's talking about the fact that conversational skills are also required by authors, it seems.
I mean, if you want to be visible and market your book, because I think Ruskin Bond had quoted someone who, he had said that authors are meant to be read, not seen, but that's not true. You have to be seen, and you have to be able to engage and have conversations. But, finally, I think I'm old-fashioned. I feel if your book is good, your book has to be good, your writing has to be good, your story has to connect, and then all of that is secondary. All of that, of course, helps. But I'm old-fashioned in that sense. I feel like your book, your content has to work. And if you have all those other qualities, great, because it helps your book. And, we live in these times where people have so much content to sample, they have so much which is fighting for their attention, that it helps if you have something which breaks the clutter. So yeah, it helps, but it's okay if you're this reclusive, intense person who doesn't want to talk to anybody. I just hope you're writing brilliant.
Yeah, I know a book which is 500 years old and the author is no more. It still speaks to you, and his words, they come at you, and you can be engrossed in whatever he or she wrote years later, and conversations are not part. But yes, a multi-dimensional personality who has got good conversational skills is also needed in society today. People are too much into their technology and not able to carry out conversation. That's another subject. Youngsters need to perhaps pick up conversational skills a little more.
They can have a conversation as long as they have a phone or a laptop in front of them. They can't talk to real people.
Yeah, they can't talk to real people. And I think we are also becoming like that. We are also talking to screens, and screen time is something which is causing red eyes. I noticed my eyes were red one day. I wondered why, and it turned out that the doctor tells me I'm watching the screen too much. So that is
Yeah.
really, we need to go out and play badminton or something else. But
Really.
really nice talking to you, Navi. It's time to hand over to the next conversationalists. And thank you for being here. Would you like to just show us the cover of your book once more so that people are
Yeah.
sure which one we're talking about? So just
It
bring it
is.
close to the screen, next to your face, in front of, yeah. So this is How to Be a Likeable Bigot. And this is the book which Naomi Datta has written. So if you can find time to get it, read it. And thank you very much for being on Chandigarh Literary Society's conversation series.